So last video, I was just talking about George Soros betting against the U.S. stock market. This is a report just from this week. With George Soros's current options, he has a $1.8 billion bet, which he will only profit from if the U.S. stock market falls. So many people looking at that, thinking it's a sign of a possible collapse, that especially with some of the unrest in the United States, that some of these bankers, the globalists, are pushing this in order to facilitate a market crash. And obviously there will be some major political changes that they can bring about if they do crash the US market. There's some similar statements, similar ominous statements from Lord Jacob Rothschild, about the future of the US market, the near future. Just in 2016, he echoed these statements from Bill Gross. This is an article from Zero Hedge. They had reported on this, but they talk about this unexpectedly gloomy warning from 2016, which the quote was, "What is surely the greatest experiment in monetary policy in the history of the world. We are therefore in uncharted waters." The central bankers are continuing this. They go on to say it is impossible to predict the unintended consequences of very low interest rates, with some 30% of global government debt at negative yields, combined with quantitative easing on a massive scale. Rothschild went on to say the geopolitical situation has deteriorated, with the UK having voted to leave the European Union. Some of this market could be the bankers getting back at some of these sovereignty movements, the Brexit, including Brexit, the presidential election in the U.S. he blames in November is likely to be unusually fraught. This was his prediction in 2016. While the situation in China, he says, remains opaque, and the slowing down of economic growth will surely lead to problems. Conflict in the Middle East continues and is unlikely to be resolved for many years. We've already felt the first consequences of this in France, Germany, and the USA in terrorist attacks. So they talked about this in 2016. Rothschild was talking about this. He has a more recent report. This was a letter to investors at RIT Capital Partners. Lord Jacob Rothschild, in this report, he's released what is perhaps his gloomiest outlook ever. According to this article, here are some highlights that they point out. I have a link to this article in the description of my video. They link to the full letter. It's fairly long, but here's a highlight. Reads, "We do not believe this is an appropriate time to add to risk. Share prices have in many cases risen to unprecedented levels at a time when economic growth is by no means assured. The SAP is selling at 25 times trailing 12 months earnings, comparing to a long-term average of 15, while the adjusted Schiller price earnings ratio, which averages profits over 10 years, is approximately 30 times. The period of monetary accommodation may well be coming to an end. Geopolitical problems remain widespread and are proving increasingly difficult to resolve. We therefore retain a moderate exposure to equity markets and have diversified our asset allocation towards equity investments where value creation is driven by some identifiable catalyst, or which are exposed to longer-term positive structural trends." So they're not seeing any sort of sign of positive structural trends, or that's not part of the plan, and depending on how you interpret it. Furthermore, also fairly worrying, Rothschild continued the shift. He's also continuing a shift away from U.S. capital markets exposure. He's announced this a year ago, noting that he has had particular interest in investments which will benefit from the impact of new technologies and Far Eastern markets. He seems to be moving into, influenced by the growing demand from Asian consumers. What is surprising is how aggressively Rothschild has cut his allocation to U.S. denominated assets in just the past 6 months. So been pretty substantial. They do a breakdown, but he's pulling a number of assets out of the U.S. So this is another sign of there definitely being some uncertainty and the elites. It seems like this is mirroring statements that they've had in the works for some months. So I don't know if this is a plan that they're just starting to escalate to the point where they're finally ready for this crash to come in a near future. Let me know what you think about some of these statements in the comments. I'll continue to report on any news related to this. If you'd leave a like on this video, that's greatly appreciated, and subscribe to the channel. I'm also over at patreon.com. It's patreon.com/realityreader. Thank you everyone that's donated. Makes a huge difference. Even $1 or $2 makes a massive difference. Helps me continue to report on these issues. I've also just like to remind people that I've signed up to Steemit. If you're on Steemit, I will moving some content over there. Obviously, there's some censorship issues going on across YouTube. I'm going to continue to report on these sorts of things as long as I can here. But I'm also going to be on steemit.com/@realityreader. There will be more content there, and just in case something happens to the YouTube platform, I'm making some contingency plans for that. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll follow up shortly. Thanks.